So I wanted to spend some time today, as I mentioned in the flyer, talking about prayer, because as we go through this pandemic and the other crises we're experiencing right now, prayer, in my mind, is an incredibly powerful tool in our tool belt, if you will, of our tool belt of spiritual practices that can help us right now face what we're facing. Prayer has this incredible ability to not only nourish and regulate us and regulate our nervous systems, but also help support us keep our hearts open and live from the most loving, most compassionate version of ourselves amidst the chaos, amidst the uncertainty around us. um, I don't know if any of you have noticed this, but one thing I'm noticing during these times that we're facing is that the shadow side of humanity, the shadow side, both personal, my shadow, and then the collective shadow, is getting illuminated through this situation that we find ourselves in. And it seems like it's getting illuminated even more right now, that things that we previously ignored, either personally or collectively, things that we sort of swept under the rug or turned away from, both as a society but also maybe in our own lives, those things are being brought into view, and sometimes feel like they're being shoved in our face. So that can be incredibly challenging. And if we put that together with just the fact that we're going through sort of a sustained trauma, as I've talked about before in the sanctuary, we're going through a trauma that doesn't, at least right now, have an end in sight to it. So if you kind of put those things together, our system is very confronted right now, and in a way is operating under hyper alert. You may find yourself, I've had a few people this week tell me they feel like their usual buffer is gone. They feel very thin skinned. They feel, and I've felt this too, that we can kind of alternate in the different threat responses. We can alternate between fight, flight, or freeze in our life. Maybe we can even alternate between those just in one given day. We might find ourselves getting in fight mode with someone in our life who's triggering us or aggravating us, or maybe we read something on the news and we get into freeze mode. Suddenly the fear takes over, the hopelessness takes over. Or maybe something just sets us off that makes us want to get away from everything, to flee. So, here we are 5-6 months into this, and you can see that living in those modes for any sustained amount of time doesn't feel good to us and isn't so good for our nervous system. And so I see prayer as something that can help regulate us amidst all that. Taking care of our spiritual health is just as important right now as taking care of our physical health. That's why places like the sanctuary, or any places in your life where you can drop into a deeper place in yourself, where your nervous system can relax, where you can feel resourced, reset, so to speak, is going to be pivotal as we continue to navigate this. And for our spiritual health, prayer is one of the best medicines we have in our medicine cabinet. And we know that, we know science now knows what traditions have known for millennia, which it's actually really good for us, not only emotionally and psychologically, but physically too. There was a doctor back in the 70s, a cardiologist from Harvard Medical School, who's one of the first doctors to study how the body responded to various spiritual practices. He studied TM, transcendental meditation. He studied biofeedback, and he studied prayer. And he discovered that no matter what the practice was, that the body showed this very common response, which he coined the term the relaxation response. And since that early study, there's been hundreds of studies on prayer, on meditation, that have kind of confirmed what he found, that prayer and meditation, can do so much for us. It lower our heart rate, lower our blood pressure, boost our immune system, reduce our levels of anxiety, which we so need right now as we go through this. Help us to have more positive moods as we go about our lives. Help us to cope better with adversity, with illness. Give us a sense of kind of that deeper existential wellness, and even help us to live longer, healthier lives. So I know I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you wouldn't be here if you didn't think these things were good. And at the same time, I think it's important, even for us, to remind ourselves every so often of the benefits of what we're doing, that these things, these practices actually do work. It's not just sort of new age spirituality, that there's a groundedness, and that these are good for us on so many different levels. And so in talking about prayer, prayer is a huge topic. I realized in getting ready for today that prayer is this vast world. I could do a whole year-long course just on prayer. So to condense it down for the time we have today, I want to just touch on a few important components or distinctions of prayer that I feel can be particularly helpful for us right now. And so often when we think about prayer, we think about praying for something, asking for something. That could be something big, like healing a loved one from a terminal illness, ending world hunger. Or it could be something as mundane as praying for a parking space, which I do. And while that's one dimension of prayer, and we do that here every week when we pray for the different groups and people that we pray for today, I'd invite us to include in that not thinking about prayer so much from the standpoint of what we're praying for, as much as from the standpoint of what is happening to us as we're praying. In other words, to think of it not so much about the content of the prayer, but actually the process of the prayer itself. Because prayer, and that's why it's part of every religious and spiritual tradition on the planet, prayer is actually one of the most powerful processes for opening us up and for connecting us to something greater than our usual sense of self. And that connection to something greater, I think, is one of the keys to this relaxation response that doctor discovered back in the 70s. And as he discovered, what you connect to, that something greater, could be many different things for many different people. It could be your own true nature. It could be, the part of you that's bigger than just your personality. Could be for some of you a higher power. Some might call that God. Some might call that the universe. Could be Mother Nature, Gaia herself. Or it could be more impersonal. It could be connecting to the quality of love, the quality of truth itself. Or it might be deeply personal. It could be a particular deity or archetype that you reach to: Christ, the Buddha, Tara. In one sense, and I know it's blasphemous to say this, but in one sense, it doesn't even matter what it is. It matters that it is. It matters that you have something greater, a greater presence than just the confines of this mind, of my little me, my little ego structure, that I can reach to something greater. And that reaching for some of us might be a reaching out to something bigger, or it might be a reaching in, pulling into that deepest part of ourselves, or it could be a little bit of both. Whether it's reaching out or reaching in, this process of prayer, as I said, is designed kind of as a spiritual technology to get us out of our normal sense of self and connect us to a force that's greater than my preferences, than my ideas about how life should be, greater than even my will, right? That there's a sense that there's something else in charge here, that I'm not the one orchestrating all the details of life, that there's something greater that I can turn to, that I belong to, that I'm a part of. When you think of the normal stance of our human ego, our personality, the normal way that we kind of go about experiencing our day-to-day life, myself included, it's some version of kind of a constricted, contracted, or even just self-centric stance. And I don't say that in a judgmental way. It's the stance that's necessary in one sense for survival. The sense of a separate me that I need to take care of and maintain and look out for. And while that's necessary in some ways, from a biological standpoint, we also know that there's so much more to life than just this own constricted sense of self, that there's actually, and you've all tasted this, you wouldn't be joining me today if you hadn't had many moments probably already of a much more expanded presence beyond my constricted idea of me. It's almost like, I think of it sometimes like our ego lives in a kind of tunnel vision, and we've all got our tunnel, we've all got our lane that our ego lives in. Depending on your personality type, the colors of that tunnel wall might take on a certain hue, and prayer in one way helps us widen out beyond that tunnel. You know, when you're in a tunnel and you come out and boom, there's a beautiful wider expanse. We come out of this narrow view and we're ushered in to the rest of what's going on, the rest of reality, a much more holistic view. And so that's really the point of prayer. If we think about prayer, as I said, as a process, it's designed to usher us out of our own little world into something so much greater. In the Christian mystical tradition, this is what's known as communion or even union, really. And that's, in any tradition, the deeper point of prayer is to open us up so that we can experience that communion, that union with the universe, with the mystery, with the divine. It may seem like, we're going through this pandemic right now. We're going through all these crises. How the heck is doing that going to help? What's that really going to do for me in the midst of coronavirus? What's that going to do in the midst of this racial crisis, this political crisis? And for me, it goes back to that very famous saying by Einstein: we cannot solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. Martin Luther King Jr. said that in a different way when he said, darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. And so if we think about what we're facing right now in the world and the level of division, the level of polarization that in some way has hit an all-time extreme, you can see how important a practice like prayer or any spiritual practice is right now, from that level of light that Dr. King is pointing us towards. From that level, we truly have a chance to heal from a very different place. And that's the place prayer is bringing us to, a place that can hold all these divisions, all these opposites with insight, with wisdom, with compassion, with understanding, with forgiveness. Those are the prescription medicines so desperately needed right now to heal us. And prayer can connect us to those qualities of our own heart, so we can begin to dispense those medicines in the world around us.